most taxes, we saw the payroll has its own kind of widget down here that deals with payroll taxes, which is quite complex. Sales tax is not as complex, typically, depending on the type of business that you are in. So you might be able to get away, in other words, with doing sales tax without you don't have to usually pay extra for the widget, or possibly the question is, do I want to track the sales tax within the system, or do I want to, do it myself and track my own basically sales tax? If you do it within the system, then you'd be in this sales tax system down here. You've got your sales tax. Let's set up your new and improved sales tax items. And you can basically, I won't go through the whole process here. We might touch on it again when we get into our full practice problem in the second half of the course. But you can set up your sales tax items. QuickBooks is getting a lot better at charging the sales tax properly by location. The problem with taxes before, and it's still a problem, is that once again, different locations have different taxes. So you can't universally just do the same thing. But now with the internet and the sophistication of the programs, they can basically look at the location we are in and hopefully use that to properly assign out the sales tax. So when we set up the sales tax, the first thing we would do if we're doing the full service sales tax system is basically set up the sales tax over here. And then when we sell stuff using the customer side, the sales forms are the invoice and the sales receipt. Invoice dealing with accounts receivable, sales receipt, no accounts receivable, like at a cash register. Noting, however, that you might also sell things with the bank deposit form, which throws a wrench into the system. You might use that, for example, if you're trying to use the bank feeds to record sales. That's going to mess things up typically because the sales tax is typically tied to the invoice and the sales orders. So the next thing you need to do then is we have to go into the sales item, and then in the products and services, these are the things that we actually sell that will populate the sales forms of invoices and purchase orders. We have our sales items. Now, as we set up these sales items, we're going to tell the system whether they're subject to tax or not. So if I set up an item here, you can see this one, we could say if it's going to be subject to sales tax. And again, QuickBooks might be able to help us to determine whether it's going to be subject to sales tax. So we're going to turn sales tax on, and then we're going to tell the system whether or not the thing we're selling is subject to sales tax and which sales tax it's subject to if we have multiple locations by the actual thing that we are selling. And in the United States, for example, some things might not be subject to a sales tax. For example, service items often might not be subject to sales tax, whereas inventory items may be subject to sales tax. We'll do this more again in the second half of the course, this whole setup process. And then you might also have one other thing that you have to deal with, which is the customers, because certain customers might not be subject to sales tax. So if I go into the sales area and into customers, let's say that we're selling not to an end customer, but to the government or something. Well, then you'd have to go into the particular customer and edit the customer. And then way down on the bottom here, if I scroll down, it says taxes. This customer is taxable. Notice the tax that they're going to be subject to is here. So, right, these are the taxes that they're subject to. Now, we could say, well, maybe they're not subject to taxes, in which case the question would be, well, why are they not subject to sales tax? Possibly they're not the end user or something like that. So that's the general layout. I'm going to say, do you want to leave without saving? Yes. So when we set up the sales tax and we're using the whole system, what do we have to do? Set up the actual sales tax items using the sales tax widget, and then add the items that we're going to include to the invoices and sales receipts, the inventory and service items, as to whether they're going to be subject to sales tax and which sales tax. And then as we add the customers, then we might have to then choose certain customers that possibly aren't subject to sales tax. Otherwise, by default, they're going to be subject to sales tax typically as we set them up as per the default sales tax applied to the items that we set up and the location that we're in, if it's like a store, for example. All right.